Hello and welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris and today we're going to look at painting some Oathmark Goblins. Something like this fella here. So I'm going for a somewhat darker theme with these goblins, but with a little bit of personality on each of the models as well. So to start off with, we're going to start by undercoating our model with black primer. You can do this with brush, spray can or airbrush, whatever floats your boat. So let's get started. We're going to start with Vallejo Natural Steel, and using an old brush I'm just going to slather that all over the metal areas, so the chainmail, the helmet, the axe, etc. I'm using this paint straight out of the bottle. We don't need to be particularly accurate at this stage, so you can just slap the paint on. And I'm not worried about getting an even coverage because I'm going for a worn metal rather than a polished and looked after metal. So it doesn't matter if the end result is patchy. Once I'm happy with that, I'll put it aside to dry and get ready for the next step, which is to apply a wash using Army Painter Dark Tone. Again, there's no need to be particularly tidy at this stage, so I'm just going to slap a whole bunch of wash over the metal areas we've just painted. Once that's dry, we can start working on the skin tone. So we're going to start with a base coat of Russian green, and using a finer brush, we're going to apply that on all the areas that need the skin tone, such as the face and the arms. We have to start being a little bit more careful here because obviously we don't want to paint over the middle parts we just did, so take your time. Once that's dry, we're going to apply a wash of Army Painter Military Shader over all those parts we just painted. Nice and easy. And once that's dry, we're going to go back with our Russian green and we're going to reapply that base colour onto the green areas, but leaving the wash in the darkest recesses. And we're going to follow that up with a highlight of Vallejo Camouflage Light Green. This is one of their model air paints, so it comes pre-thinned for use with airbrushes. You can still use it with a brush, no trouble. It'll just take a couple of coats to build up that colour. And we're going to apply this paint to the high areas, such as the cheekbones, the nose, the chin, the knuckles, and anywhere else that's really going to catch the light. I know there's been a bit of discussion on the Oathmark Players page Facebook group about the skin colour of goblins. If green isn't your jam, you just use the same steps with a different set of colours. So maybe you want to start with a dark grey and a black wash, and then highlight that up. Or perhaps you want to start with a yellow-brown, a brown wash, and then highlight from there. It's really just personal preference. To add a little bit of extra detail to the skin tone, I'm going to add a couple of freckles. So using the same paint we've just been using, I'm just going to load it up and put a couple of little spots in places along the forearms, just to break the flat green up a little bit and add that little extra bit of detail. Next up, we're going to do some black. I'm using Vallejo Surface Primer Black here, but any old black will do. And I'm going to start off with a really nice fine brush to start doing the eyes. Now to do the eyes, using this fine brush, I'm just going to make a small horizontal line where the eyes are. Eyes are, to me, something that really brings life to the model, so I love doing it. You just need to have a steady hand and a small amount of paint on the brush, and practice really. Once they're done, I'm going to go back to my regular brush, and using the black, I'm going to paint the areas of cloth along the shoulder. And I'll do the sleeve as well, but I'll do that later because I forget about it now. This is just a nice and easy base colour, just taking care to make sure that I don't paint areas that have already been painted. To paint the whites of the eyes, we're going to use, surprisingly enough, white. Using the fine brush again, we're going to put two small white dots on either side of the black lines we painted earlier. And I'm just going to apply those with a little sort of downwards motion, making sure to leave an area of black between the two. Steady hands are the name of the game here. So I have the figure firmly locked into its painting handle. My hands are firmly pressed against that handle and firmly pressed against the table itself to create as stable a platform as I possibly can. And I'm using the smallest movements of my hands possible to try and keep everything as steady and accurate as can be. And if you do all of that and have the luck of the gods with you, you've got some eyes. Next up, we're going to grab some Vallejo medium flesh tone, and we're going to mix that about 50-50 with some water to make a wash. We're only going to need a very small amount, but we're going to put that inside the mouth, over the lips, and make sure we get it around the teeth. That'll take a little while to dry, so in the meantime, we'll grab some Vallejo black grey, and we will highlight the black areas. There's not too much to say here, it's just a matter of highlighting the edges and the high areas. The wash in the mouth is still drying, so we're going to go ahead and start working on the leather and the wood instead, and we're going to start that with a base coat of Vallejo chocolate. This is a very well loved bottle, so you're going to have to take my word for it. This is chocolate. So we're going to hit the boots, the belts, the bracelets, the pouch and the handle of the axe. Once again, we need to be accurate to make sure that we don't paint over areas we've already painted, but also we don't have to worry too much about getting a smooth, even coat, because just like the metal I did earlier, I'm going for a worn, ruddy look with the leather and the wood, and any unevenness in the base coat is just going to add texture to the final look. Once that's done, we're going to add a mid-tone to the leather with Vallejo Flat Earth. We're going to apply this colour to the areas of the leather that would see the most wear, such as the end of the toes, the ankles, the heels, and all the various high points and edges of each of the leather components. I'm not particularly worried about accuracy at this stage, and you'll see I apply the paint in a fairly blotchy fashion. This is all to add to that mottled, worn appearance of the leather. For the final highlight, as it were, for the leather, we're going to use Vallejo Dark Sand. This colour gets applied on the very edges of the leather where it would see the most wear. This represents where the leather has been worn down through the top layers, exposing undyed or unstained leather from underneath. Again, this isn't a traditional highlight, as it were. You're applying the paint where the wear would happen. So think about where your boots are scuffed and where your pouch is rubbed against the stone wall or your belt is twisted and bent. The more dark sand you put down, the more worn and degraded the leather's going to look. Perfect for goblins, a little less so for elves perhaps. The wash in the mouth is dried, so next up is Army Painter Flesh Wash, and that gets applied into the mouth and over the teeth to add some definition there. Quick and easy. Next up, Vallejo Beige Brown, which we're going to use to highlight the wood of the axe handle. We do this by adding a series of lines running up and down the shaft of the axe to give the hint of wood grain. And then we'll tie the colours of the wood and the leather together with a coat of Army Painter Strong Tone. We apply this wash fairly liberally over all of the leather and wood. This just helps bring the tone of all the different colours of the leather and the different colours of the wood together, and just eases the transition between them. Next up, Vallejo Iraqi Sand. Using this colour, we're going to paint the teeth of the goblin. So we're going to give that a nice even base coat. And then using the white I've already got on my palette, I'm just going to hit the tips of those teeth and give them a nice highlight. Too easy. I now give the model a quick once over to see what I've missed and finally catch that sleeve. So I'll give that a base coat of black and a highlight of dark grey. And then I'm going to do exactly the same to the grip on the sword. Well, dagger I suppose. Anyway, next is Vallejo Japanese Uniform World War II. And I'm going to put this on the trousers. As a light colour going over a black base coat, it will take a couple of coats to get a nice even colour. Now, I find the trousers on the goblins is a really good place to add a little bit of personality to each of the figures. So quite often I'll use a bright colour and use a different colour for each of the goblins, just to add a bit of difference. When looking at the regiment as a whole, they'll look fairly uniform, but if you look closer, the individual personality of each of the goblins will pop out. Take this crazy bugger for example. I'd just finished painting one trouser leg when I thought, his trousers probably have legs of two different colours. So let's go with black and yellow. As part of a unit, it would go unnoticed, but if you start looking at the individual figures, you'll be like, huh, who's this crazy guy? So we're going to paint the black exactly the same as we've done all the blacks before, and focus on getting an even coverage of the yellow. While waiting for the yellow to dry, we'll hit the shield strap with a little bit of Iraqi sand. And then the spikes on the bracelets with a bit of natural steel. With the pants now dry, we'll crack out the Army Painter soft tone, and we'll hit the shield strap and the yellow of the pants. Once that's dry, we're going to whip out the Tamiya Flat Clear and give it a spray. Back in a jiffy. And here we are, nice and flat, which brings out a lot of the richness of the colours, but unfortunately it does dull the metal somewhat, so we need to bring some shine back to those. So we're going to go and grab our natural steel again, and we're just going to hit the edges and some of the highlights of the metal to make the worn areas really shine. I quite like the contrast between the flat metal, which hasn't been looked after, and then the shiny areas which have been polished or scuffed or sharpened or what have you. I find that the contrast between the two looks really good. I'm going to push that contrast even further with a bit of Vallejo steel, and this gets applied to the most well looked after or the most worn parts of his equipment, such as a shiny belt buckle or the sharpened edge of his axe, or maybe a fresh scratch on the helmet. Some of the goblin arms have what look like small metal bracelets on them, and I'll often paint those in silver or brass just to add a bit of extra shininess and bling to the goblin. After all, goblins love their shinies. And there we go, the goblin is now ready for basing. I'll be hitting mine with a grout and soil mix, and then a bit of static grass. But while that dries, I'm going to work on the shield. I've got some of the transfers from North Star that I'll be using for these goblins. So with the shield still on the sprue, I've hit them with a white spray on the front and a brown spray across the back. The back are hit with a very quick wash of Army Painter Strong Tone. I'm not going to do much more details on the back here because, face it, it's going to be hidden most of the time. On the front, we're going to paint the metal areas black, then natural steel, and then give them a wash of dark tone, just like we did on the goblin itself, being careful to keep the face of the shield white. The reason we leave it white is because it will give you the most vibrant colours from the transfer that we're going to put on later. And with the magic of editing, now is later, so onto the transfer. First off, we need to cut it out using a pair of scissors. Try to be as accurate as you can, though if you are a little bit worried, it is better to be oversized than undersized, so you can leave a little bit of a white border around the edges. Then you peel off the clear plastic front and press the decal down onto the shield. Good gods, Chris, you've really stuffed that up and you're recording and everything. Not to worry, if you do have some trouble getting it where you want it, you can use a scalpel. If you stick the decal to the tip of the scalpel, it makes it much easier to maneuver it around, and then you can press it down onto the shield and slide the scalpel away when you're in place. Ah, much better. Give the decal a light press to make sure it's not going to move around, but don't expect to stick the thing down perfectly at this stage. And then we're going to grab a brush, load it up on filthy paint water, and then we're going to put that on the paper on the back of the decal. Give it a second or two to soak in, and then we can press the decal firmly into position. The wet paper will allow it to conform to the surface a heck of a lot better than when it was dry. Then once we're set, we'll just slide that paper off nice and easy. To further make sure the decal is adhering really well, we're going to grab our damp brush, and we're just going to use the damp brush to press it down and work out any wrinkles and make sure it goes into the corners and everything where we need it. There, that wasn't so bad. A bit of black paint to touch up the edges and cover up any of the stark white, and we're ready for a dull coat. Once again, the metal gets touched up with a bit of natural steel, and the shields are ready to be clipped out. Once clipped out, we can clear off the excess plastic with a sharp knife, and then cover over that exposed plastic with a bit of brown paint. To attach the shield to the goblin, we'll be using a little bit of super glue with a dot on the back of the hand and a dot about halfway down the forearm. Line up the grip on the back of the shield with the grip in the goblin's hand and press it in place. Another touch of black paint to cover up any exposed plastic along the edges, and we're almost done. Don't forget to paint the rim of your bases. And we are done. I do so hope that this video has been helpful and enjoyable for you, and we'll see you all next time. Cheers!